They tell you that 65 is the golden age. They tell you it's the time for retirement, for garden clubs, and for spoiling your grandchildren. But nobody tells you what happens when your life is stolen from you in the blink of an eye. Nobody tells you that at 67, instead of resting, you'll be on your hands and knees scrubbing marble floors until your knuckles turn white. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. My name is June Nixon. If you walked past me on the street in Cambridge, you wouldn't look twice. I'm just an old woman in a gray coat dragging a cleaning cart behind me. I'm invisible. And honestly, for a long time, being invisible was the only thing that kept me safe. But today, invisibility isn't enough. Today, the past didn't just knock on my door, it kicked it down. To understand why I'm standing in this hallway, shaking like a leaf, you have to understand what I lost. 10 years ago, I wasn't cleaning toilets for billionaires. I was a guidance counselor. I had a small house with blue shutters just outside of Boston. I had a garden full of hydrangeas. And I had Christopher. Christopher was my husband for 30 years. He was the kind of man who opened doors for strangers and always remembered to buy me peppermint ice cream on Fridays. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. We had plans. We were going to travel to Italy when we retired. We had our pensions sorted out. We were safe. Then came that Tuesday. It was a Tuesday in November, gray and cold. Christopher put on his coat and said he was going to the corner store for milk. He kissed me on the cheek. I didn't watch him walk out the door. I was busy folding laundry. I didn't know it was the last time I'd ever see him. He never came back. The police found his car abandoned 3 towns over, near a bridge. No note, no body, just gone. For the first year, I waited by the window every single night. I thought maybe he had amnesia, maybe he was hurt. But as the years dragged on, the hope turned into a heavy, cold stone in my stomach. 7 years later, the state declared him dead in absentia. That was the final nail in the coffin of my old life. Because Christopher's pension, it died with him. The life insurance, they wouldn't pay out without a body. I lost the house with the blue shutters. I lost the garden. I sold my wedding ring to pay off the debts he left behind. Debts I didn't even know existed until the collectors started calling. So here I am, 10 years later, a widow who isn't really a widow, a woman who should be retired, but instead I'm working for elite domestic services, catering to the whimsical needs of the ultra-wealthy in Massachusetts. This morning was harder than most. My arthritis was flaring up, a sharp, grinding pain in my hips that makes walking feel like a punishment. But I couldn't call in sick. I need the money for my medication. My rent went up again last month, and my Social Security check barely covers the heating bill. I took the bus to the address the agency gave me. It was in the high-end district of Cambridge, where the driveways are longer than my entire street. The agency girl, a young thing who snaps her gum while she talks, told me this was a special assignment. The Mazzarella estate, she said, handing me a key card. Don't talk to the owner unless he speaks to you. He's particular, reclusive. Just do the floors and the dusting and get out. I didn't care about the owner. I just wanted to get the job done and go home to my cat and my heating pad. But when I arrived at the gate, I felt a shiver go down my spine. It wasn't the cold. It was something else. A feeling of dread I couldn't explain. The house was massive, a modern fortress of glass and stone, surrounded by high hedges. It looked cold, unwelcoming. I let myself in through the service entrance, just like I always do. The air inside was conditioned to a perfect, crisp 68 degrees. It smelled expensive, like lemon polish and old wood. I started in the foyer. The silence in these big houses is always heavy. You can hear your own breathing. You can hear the squeak of your rubber-soled shoes. As I mopped the black and white tiles, I tried to keep my mind blank, but my knees were screaming at me. Every time I bent down to scrub a scuff mark, I had to grit my teeth. I resent them sometimes. The people who live here. I try to be a good Christian woman, but it's hard not to feel bitter when you're cleaning mud off a pair of shoes that cost more than your car. I wondered where Mr. Mazzarella was. The house felt empty, but the agency said he never leaves. I moved to the library next. It was a beautiful room, lined with books that looked like they had never been opened. I was dusting a mahogany table when it hit me. The smell. It was faint, lingering in the air like a ghost. Old Spice and tobacco. My hand froze on the duster. That was Christopher's scent. He didn't smoke cigarettes. He smoked a pipe just once in a while on the back porch. And he wore Old Spice because his father wore it. And he was a creature of habit. I stood there, sniffing the air like a crazy person. My heart did a little flutter in my chest. Stop it, June. I whispered to myself. Stop it right now. It's been 10 years. My mind was playing tricks on me. Plenty of men wear Old Spice. Plenty of men smoke pipes. It didn't mean anything. I forced myself to keep moving. I wiped down the shelves, my hands trembling just a little. I told myself I was just tired. I was hungry. I hadn't eaten breakfast because I was rationing my groceries until payday. I finished the library and checked my list. The master suite was next. Usually, the master suite is off limits if the owner is home, but the note from the agency said, clean master bath and bedroom between 10 a.m. and 11 a.m. Owner will be in meetings. I checked my watch. 10:15. I was right on schedule. I pushed my cart down the long hallway. The paintings on the walls were strange. Modern art, splashes of red and black that looked violent. I didn't like this house. I wanted to finish and leave. I wanted to go home and pretend I didn't smell my dead husband's cologne in a stranger's library. I reached the double doors of the master suite. I knocked softly. Housekeeping. Silence. I knocked again, louder. Nothing. I pushed the door open. The room was dark, the heavy velvet curtains drawn tight against the morning sun. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust. It was messy in here, unlike the rest of the pristine house. Clothes were thrown on the floor. The bed was unmade. I stepped inside, parking my cart by the door. I started picking up the shirts from the floor. Silk. Expensive. I was folding a gray dress shirt when I heard a voice. It came from the balcony. The glass door was cracked open, just an inch. I froze. I hadn't realized anyone was there. I clutched the gray shirt to my chest, ready to apologize and back out. I should have left right then. I should have turned around, walked out, and never come back. But the voice kept me rooted to the spot. It was a deep voice. Raspy. A smoker's voice. I told you to sell the stocks, didn't I? The man was saying. He sounded angry. Impatient. I couldn't see him clearly yet. The curtains were blocking my view of the balcony. But the cadence of his speech, the rhythm of it, it made my stomach drop. Listen to me, the man snapped. I don't care what the projections say. I want out. I took a step closer. I couldn't help myself. My breath was caught in my throat. It couldn't be. It was impossible. Christopher was dead. He was dead. I had a certificate that said so. The man on the balcony paced into view. I saw him from the back. He was wearing a navy blue robe. He had gray hair, thicker than I remembered, but the set of his shoulders was so familiar it made my knees weak. He was holding a cell phone to his ear, his posture tense. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous tick. Christopher used to do exactly that when he was worried about money. I must have made a sound, a gasp, a rustle of fabric, but he didn't turn around. He was too engrossed in his call. stopped whining, he barked into the phone. And then he said it. He said the words that stopped my heart. He said the phrase that Christopher used to say to me every time we talked about our future, every time we saved a little money for that trip to Italy, every time I got excited about a tax refund. Don't count your chickens before they hatch, kid. The world stopped spinning. The room went silent. The blood roared in my ears. Don't count your chickens before they hatch, kid. Nobody says that anymore. It's an old phrase, but Christopher said it. He said it constantly, and he always called me kid, even when I was 50. My grip on the gray shirt tightened. I felt like I was going to throw up. I stared at the back of the man's head. Darwin Mazzarella, the billionaire, the recluse, the man who sounded exactly, terrifyingly like my dead husband. He started to turn around. I didn't stay to see the man on the balcony turn around. I couldn't. Panic is a strange thing. When you're young, panic makes you scream and run. But when you're 67, panic just freezes you. It turns your blood to ice water. I backed out of that master suite slowly, quietly clutching my cleaning rag to my chest like a shield. I pulled the heavy door shut until it clicked, and then I leaned my forehead against the cool wood, gasping for air. Get a grip, June, I whispered to myself. My heart was hammering against my ribs, so hard I thought it might crack one. You are hearing things. You are a tired old woman, and you are hearing things. It made sense, didn't it? Grief does funny things to the mind. Even 10 years later, grief is a shapeshifter. Sometimes it's a heavy weight, and sometimes it's a trick of the light. I told myself that phrase, don't count your chickens before they hatch, kid, was just a coincidence. It's a common saying. Old men say it all the time. And besides, that man, Darwin Mazzarella, he looked too young. From the glimpse I caught of his back, his posture was too straight. His hair was gray, yes, but it was thick and styled. Christopher would be 70 years old by now. His back gave him trouble when it rained. He had a bald spot he was always trying to comb over. The man on the balcony moved with an energy Christopher hadn't had in years. It wasn't him. It couldn't be him. Christopher was dead. The state of Massachusetts said so. The empty side of my bed said so. I forced myself to push away from the door. I had a job to do. If I didn't finish the library by noon, the agency would dock my pay, and I couldn't afford to lose even $10. I wiped the sweat from my upper lip, smoothed down my gray uniform, and headed back down the hall toward the library. Work is good for the nerves. That's what my mother always used to say. Idle hands make for a worried mind. So I threw myself into the cleaning. I polished the mahogany banisters until they gleamed. I scrubbed the baseboards until my knees screamed in protest. By the time I got back to the library, my breathing had slowed down. I felt foolish. I was letting my imagination run away with me just because I was in a spooky big house with a rich owner. I set up my stepladder. The library had these floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that looked like something out of a movie. The shelves near the top were caked in dust. Clearly, nobody had touched them in years. I climbed the ladder slowly. My arthritis flared with every step, a sharp pinch in my hip. Careful, old girl, I muttered, don't fall. Medicare doesn't cover stupidity. I reached the top shelf and started dusting. It was mostly old encyclopedias and legal texts. Boring stuff. Rich people buy books by the yard just to fill up the space. They don't actually read them. But as I reached for a cobweb in the corner, my elbow bumped a stack of heavy, leather-bound books. They wobbled. I lunged to catch them, but my reflexes aren't what they used to be. One of them, a massive book bound in dark red leather, tipped over the edge. It hit the floor with a sound like a gunshot. Thud. I froze on the ladder, waiting for security to come bursting in. I waited for Mr. Mazzarella to come shouting, but the house remained silent, just the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I let out a breath and climbed down carefully. Butterfingers, I scolded myself. I knelt down to pick up the book. It had landed face open. It wasn't a reading book. It was a photo album. The pages were thick, creamy cardstock. The book had fallen open to a center spread. I went to close it, to put it back on the shelf where it belonged, but my hand stopped. My eyes snagged on the date, written in gold calligraphy at the bottom of the page. June 14th, 2016. I stared at the date. The math happened automatically in my head. Christopher disappeared in November of 2014. This photo was taken 2 years later. 2 years after I had filed the missing person report. 2 years after I had spent my nights calling hospitals and morgues, sobbing until I couldn't breathe. I looked at the photo above the date. It was a wedding picture, a lavish outdoor affair. There were white roses everywhere, thousands of them. I remember looking at the price of white roses once for our anniversary, and Christopher had laughed and said, "Maybe in another life, June." In the photo, a beautiful woman in a silk dress was laughing, holding a champagne flute. She looked rich. She looked happy, but I didn't care about the woman. My eyes were locked on the groom. The caption underneath read, "David and Claire Mazzarella." David, that was Darwin's older brother. The one the agency girl said had passed away recently. I looked at David's face, and the world didn't just stop spinning. It tilted off its axis. The man in the photo was smiling. It was a smile I knew better than my own reflection. It was a smile I had woken up to for 30 years. It was Christopher. I dropped my dust rag. I fell back onto my heels, sitting hard on the Persian rug. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." I brought the album closer, my hands shaking so violently the heavy book rattled against the floor. I squinted at the face. It had to be a mistake, a look-alike, a cousin. But there was the nose. Christopher had a slightly crooked nose, broken in a high school football game. The man in the photo had the same break. There were the eyes, deep set, with those little crinkles at the corners when he smiled. And then I saw it, the proof, the undeniable, impossible proof. On the man's chin, just below his lip, was a tiny, jagged white scar. Christopher got that scar when he was trying to fix the gutter on our house in 1998. He slipped and cut his chin on a piece of flashing. I was the one who drove him to the emergency room. I was the one who held his hand while he got 3 stitches. I traced the scar in the photo with my trembling finger. I could almost feel the phantom texture of it. Christopher, I choked out the name. It felt like a stone in my throat. He wasn't David Mazzarella. He was Christopher Nixon. My Christopher. I frantically turned the pages. I needed to see more. Maybe it was just one bad angle. Maybe I was crazy. But page after page, it was him. Here was David on a yacht in the Mediterranean. He was wearing a linen suit, holding a cigar. Christopher always said he wanted to see the ocean before he died. We were saving for a cruise, a cheap Carnival cruise. And here he was on a private yacht. Here was David standing in front of the Colosseum in Rome. Rome, my dream city. We had a jar on the kitchen counter labeled Italy Fund. I put my spare change in it for 5 years. When he disappeared, there was only $400 in it. I had to use that money to pay for his funeral memorial service, an empty casket in a cold church. And here he was, alive, in Rome. 2 years after he left me, a sound tore out of my throat, half sob, half scream. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle it. The betrayal hit me harder than the grief. It was a physical blow to the stomach. I doubled over, gasping for air. He hadn't been kidnapped. He hadn't fallen into the river. He hadn't had a heart attack in the woods. He had left. He had walked out the door for milk, driven away, and walked into a life of billions. He left me with the mortgage. He left me with the debts. He left me to age alone, to worry about heating bills and the price of eggs, while he was drinking champagne in Paris with a woman who looked like a movie star. You upgraded. I hissed at the photo. Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and angry. You didn't die. You just upgraded. I looked at his clothes in the photos. Tailored suits. Italian leather shoes. The watch on his wrist in one picture cost more than the house we lived in. How? How was this possible? How does a high school guidance counselor become a billionaire heir named David Mazzarella? My mind was racing, trying to put the pieces together, but the anger was drowning out the logic. I wanted to tear the pages out. I wanted to scream until the windows shattered. I wanted to find that grave I visited every year on his birthday and spit on it. I was staring at a photo of him cutting a wedding cake, a cake that was 5 tiers high, when I heard it. Click-clack, click-clack, footsteps, hard-soled shoes on the marble floor of the hallway. They were coming fast, and they were coming toward the library. I froze. I looked at the mess around me. The ladder was crooked. The duster was on the floor. And I was sitting there, a sobbing mess, clutching a family photo album that I had no business touching. If Darwin found me like this, if he saw what I was looking at, I didn't know what he would do, but looking at the face of the man who stole my husband's face, or looking at the brother of the man who was my husband, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't safe here. The footsteps got louder. A shadow stretched under the library door. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the screaming pain in my knees. I slammed the album shut. I shoved the album back onto the shelf just as Darwin walked into the library. He didn't even look at me. That's the thing about men like Darwin Mazzarella. To him, I wasn't a person with a beating heart and a life that had just been shattered into a million pieces. I was furniture. I was a gray uniform and a feather duster. He walked right past me, grabbed a file from his desk, and walked out, talking into his headset about stocks and margins. I stood there, gripping the ladder until my knuckles turned white. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, like a war drum. I should have left. A smarter woman would have packed up her cleaning cart, clocked out, and never come back. I should have gone home, made a cup of tea, and told myself it was just a coincidence. I needed this job. I needed the $300 a week to keep the lights on, but I couldn't move. I kept seeing that face, Christopher's face, smiling, tan, alive. I thought about the last 10 years. I thought about the nights I sat in the dark because I couldn't afford to fix the fuse box. I thought about the time I had to sell my mother's engagement ring to pay for a root canal. I thought about the shame of standing in line at the food bank, hoping none of my old students would see me, while I was scraping by, surviving on peanut butter toast and prayer. Christopher, my Christopher, was drinking wine in Italy. He was wearing silk suits. He was living a life he had promised me. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was quiet. It was the sound of a woman who has been polite for 67 years, finally deciding she's done being polite. I didn't finish dusting the library. Instead, I reached back up and pulled that heavy red album off the shelf. It was heavy in my arms, like a stone tablet. I tucked it under my arm. I marched out of the library. My knees didn't hurt anymore. The adrenaline washed the pain away. I walked down the long, silent hallway, following the sound of the espresso machine I had heard earlier. I found him in the kitchen. It was a chef's kitchen, all stainless steel and black marble, cold and sterile. Darwin was standing by the island, sipping a tiny cup of coffee, reading something on his tablet. He looked relaxed. He looked like a man who owned the world. He didn't hear me come in. I wasn't trying to be quiet this time. I walked right up to the island and slammed the album down on the marble counter. Thud. The sound echoed off the high ceilings. Darwin jumped. He spilled a little bit of coffee on his cuff. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with shock. For a second, he just looked confused. He opened his mouth to scold me, probably to tell me that the library books didn't belong in the kitchen. But I didn't give him the chance. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. It's an old wallet, leather that's peeling at the edges. I unzipped the coin pouch and pulled out the photo I've kept there for 30 years. It's a picture of Christopher and me at a barbecue in 1999. He's laughing, holding a paper plate. The sun is in his eyes. I slapped the photo down next to the open album. "Explain this," I said. My voice didn't shake. I was surprised by how steady it sounded. It was the voice I used to use on troublemaker students in the guidance office. Darwin stared at me. He looked at the album. He looked at my tattered little photo. Then he looked at my face. "Excuse me," he said, his tone icy. "What do you think you're doing? You're the cleaning lady. You don't." "I'm not asking about the cleaning." I cut him off. I pointed a shaking finger at the groom in the wedding album. "I am asking why my husband, Christopher Nixon, is in your wedding album labeled as your brother." Darwin froze. The color drained out of his face so fast it was scary. 1 minute he was tanned and healthy. The next he looked like dirty chalk. He set his coffee cup down, and his hand was trembling. He didn't look confused, ladies. If he had looked confused, I might have doubted myself. If he had squinted at the picture and said, "I don't see the resemblance," I might have backed down. But he didn't look confused. He looked terrified. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a dry choke. "This is my brother, David Mazzarella. Don't lie to me." I stepped closer. I could smell his cologne, expensive, musky. It made me sick. Look at the scar on his chin. Look at the nose. That is Christopher. He disappeared 10 years ago. He went out for milk and never came back. Darwin flinched when I said, 10 years ago. His eyes darted to the door, like he was checking for an escape route. That's a coincidence," Darwin said, but his voice was thin. David was estranged from the family. He ran away when he was young. He only came back to us 10 years ago. I felt the air leave my lungs. 10 years ago, I whispered. The timeline fit. It fit perfectly like a key in a lock. Christopher disappeared from my life on a Tuesday. And shortly after, David miraculously returned to the Mazzarella family after being missing for decades. "He didn't come back," I said, my voice rising. "He replaced him. My husband. He took your brother's place? Or you hired him? Is that it?" I was guessing, grasping at straws, but I saw the panic in Darwin's eyes flare up. I was hitting a nerve. I was getting too close. Darwin straightened up. He pulled the mask back on. He squared his shoulders and tried to look like the billionaire again, but I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. "You are delusional," he spat. "You are a grief-stricken old woman, and you are imagining things. David is dead. He died 6 months ago. Christopher is dead." I asked, the grief hitting me sideways again. "David," he yelled. "His name was David, and he was my brother." He grabbed the album and slammed it shut, pulling it away from me like a child hiding a toy. "You have 5 minutes, Darwin said, his voice low and dangerous. 5 minutes to get your things and get out of my house. If I see you here again, I'll call the police. I'll tell them you were stealing. Who do you think they'll believe? Me or the maid with the empty bank account. He leaned over the counter, his face inches from mine. Do not come back. Do not talk about this. If you value your freedom, June, you will walk away and forget you ever saw this book. He wasn't just firing me. He was threatening me. And that's when I knew. I knew with 100% certainty that I was right. Innocent men don't threaten old ladies. Innocent men don't turn pale when you show them a photograph. He was hiding something. He knew who Christopher was. I grabbed my wallet and my photo off the counter. I looked him dead in the eye. I wanted him to see me, really see me, not the maid, not the invisible woman. I'm leaving, I said quietly, but I'm not forgetting. I turned and walked out of the kitchen. My heart was breaking all over again. Finding out your husband is dead is one thing. Finding out he erased you, that he threw you away like yesterday's trash to play the role of a rich man, that hurts in a way I can't even describe. I gathered my coat and my purse from the utility closet. I left the cleaning cart right there in the middle of the hall. Let him clean it up. I walked out the front door into the cold Cambridge air. The wind bit at my cheeks, drying the tears before they could fall. I stood on the sidewalk, looking back at that massive fortress of a house. I had lost my job. I had lost my husband twice now. I had nothing. But as I stood there, shivering in my thin coat, I felt something change inside me. For 10 years, I had been sad. I had been the poor, pitying widow June. I had let life happen to me, but sadness was heavy. Anger was fuel. Darwin thought he had scared me off. He thought that by threatening to call the police, he could silence the cleaning lady. He thought I would go back to my tiny apartment, cry into my pillow, and disappear. He forgot one thing. I'm a guidance counselor. I spent 40 years figuring out when teenagers were lying to me. I know a guilty conscience when I see one. I walked to the bus stop, my head held high. I wasn't going home to cry. I was going home to plan. Because Darwin made a mistake. He told me David died 6 months ago. If Christopher was pretending to be David, and David is dead, then there's a grave somewhere. And graves can't lie. I checked the bus schedule. I wasn't going to let this go. I was going to find out exactly what happened to my husband. And if Darwin Mazzarella thought he could intimidate me, he was about to learn that there is nothing on this earth more dangerous than a woman who has nothing left to lose. I made it as far as the bus stop before I realized I had made a terrible mistake. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely zip my coat. I was standing there, staring at the cracked pavement, my mind replaying that confrontation in the kitchen over and over. I could still see the fear in Darwin's eyes. I could still hear him threatening to call the police on me. I reached into my pocket to check for my bus pass, and my stomach dropped. My pocket was empty. My bus pass, my wallet, and, worst of all, my house keys were gone. I froze in my rush to get out of that house, in my desperate need to escape the suffocation of Darwin's lies. I had left my cleaning apron in the utility closet. My keys were in the front pocket of that apron. I couldn't go home. I couldn't even get into my apartment building without those keys. And I certainly couldn't afford a locksmith on a Sunday. I looked back up the hill toward the Mazzarella estate. The iron gates were looming in the distance. I had a choice. I could call the agency, admit I was fired, and ask them to contact Darwin to get my keys. But if I did that, I'd never get back inside. Darwin would probably throw my keys over the fence and tell me to get lost. Or I could go back. Right now. I knew the service code for the side gate. I knew the cleaner's entrance didn't have a security camera. It was broken. I had reported it last week and nobody fixed it. And I knew something else. Darwin was rattled. He was likely in his office doing damage control, maybe shredding documents or calling lawyers. He wouldn't be patrolling the hallways. A strange calm washed over me. It wasn't bravery. It was necessity. But beneath the necessity, there was that burning spark of anger again. I wasn't just going back for my keys. I was going back for answers. I turned around and started walking back up the hill. The walk felt different this time. I wasn't the tired cleaning lady anymore. I was a woman on a mission. I punched the code into the keypad at the service entrance. 1-9-8-4. The latch clicked. I slipped inside the mudroom. The house was dead silent. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen down the hall, but no footsteps, no voices. I crept to the utility closet and grabbed my apron. My keys were there, safe and sound. I clutched them in my hand. I should have turned around and left right then. I had what I came for, but I didn't leave. I looked down the hallway toward the east wing. That was where the guest suites were. And more importantly, that was where David's old room was. The agency girl had mentioned it once. She said Darwin kept his brother's room exactly as it was, like a shrine. If Christopher really was pretending to be David, the proof would be in that room. I took off my heavy shoes so I could walk quietly in my socks. I felt like a criminal. I'm a woman who pays her taxes early and never speeds. But today, I was breaking every rule I ever lived by. I moved through the house like a ghost. I reached the double doors of the east suite. The handle turned easily. The room smelled stale, like dust and old cologne. I slipped inside and closed the door softly behind me. It was a bedroom fit for a king. A 4-poster bed, velvet drapes, and a view of the garden. But I didn't care about the furniture. I went straight for the bathroom. Why? Because you can change your face. You can dye your hair. You can wear expensive suits and learn to speak Italian. But you cannot change your medical history. Christopher played football in high school. He was a quarterback. In 1974, he was tackled wrong and shattered his left ankle. He had a metal pin and 2 screws put in to hold the bone together. He used to complain about it every time the weather turned cold. I opened the vanity drawers in the bathroom. They were full of expensive grooming products, beard oil, luxury shaving cream. Things Christopher never bought. He was a bar of soap man. I dug deeper. Bottom drawer. Underneath a stack of towels. I felt something hard. A plastic folder. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled it out. It was a medical file from a private clinic in Switzerland. The label read, Patient David Mazzarella. I opened it. My eyes scanned the pages frantically. Blood pressure normal. Cholesterol slightly high. And then there it was. An X-ray report dated 8 years ago. Orthopedic consult. Patient complains of stiffness in left ankle. X-ray confirms presence of surgical hardware. 1 metal pin, 2 screws. Medial malleolus fracture. Healed. I had to grab the counter to keep from falling. David Mazzarella didn't play football. David Mazzarella was an artist who ran away to Mexico. But Christopher Nixon had a metal pin in his left ankle. I looked at the X-ray film attached to the file. I'm not a doctor, but I've seen Christopher's ankle X-ray a dozen times. I know the angle of that screw. I know the way the bone healed a little crooked. It was him. This wasn't just a resemblance. This was biological proof. The man living in this house, the man calling himself David, was my husband. Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them away. I was furious. He used to make me massage that ankle with peppermint oil when it hurt. I used to baby him because of that injury, and he used it to walk away from me. I shoved the file back into the folder. I needed more. An X-ray proves he's Christopher, but it doesn't explain why. I went back into the bedroom. I started checking the nightstands. Top drawer, reading glasses, a pack of mints. Second drawer, a passport. I opened it. David Mazzarella. But the photo was Christopher. He looked smug. I checked the other nightstand. Nothing. I looked around the room. Where would he hide things? Christopher was paranoid. He used to hide his candy bars in his sock drawer, so I wouldn't find them. I went to the tall dresser. I pulled open the sock drawer, and there, tucked all the way in the back, behind a roll of black cashmere socks, was a small black notebook. It wasn't a fancy journal. It was a simple Moleskine notebook. Christopher always carried one. He liked to make lists, grocery lists, to-do lists, bucket lists. I pulled it out. My hands were trembling so hard I almost dropped it. I opened the cover. The handwriting hit me like a physical slap. It was his. The messy, slanted scrawl. The way he didn't cross his T's. All the way. The way his G's looked like Y's. I sank down onto the edge of the bed. I started reading. It wasn't a grocery list. It was a diary. January 4th, 2015. Darwin says the transition is almost complete. The lawyers bought the story about my amnesia and my time in Mexico. Nobody questions a billionaire who wants to give away money. Being David is easier than I thought. I just have to smile and sign the checks. I flipped forward. July 12th, 2016. Claire wants to go to Rome. I told her yes. I always wanted to go. It's funny how easy life is when you don't have to count pennies. He was talking about our dream, our Italy trip. He took her. I flipped toward the end. The entries got shorter, darker. October 20th, 2023. The doctor says the liver is failing. Ironic. I sold my soul for the good life, and now the good life is killing me. The scotch was too expensive, I guess. And then the last entry, dated just 3 months ago. I read it, and my breath hitched in my throat. I think about June sometimes. I wonder if she kept the house. I assume the life insurance paid out eventually. I hope she's okay. But looking at this room, looking at the bank account, I can't say I regret it. The money was worth the guilt. A man only gets one life. I chose the better one. The money was worth the guilt. I read that sentence 3 times. He didn't miss me. He didn't regret leaving me destitute. He didn't care that I lost the house. He assumed the life insurance paid out. He didn't even bother to check. He didn't know I couldn't get a dime because there was no body. He chose the money. He looked at our 30 years of marriage, weighed it against a pile of cash, and chose the cash. I closed the book. I stood up. The sadness was gone. Completely gone. It evaporated like mist in the sun. In its place was something cold and hard. A block of ice in the center of my chest. I wasn't the grieving widow anymore. I wasn't the poor cleaning lady. I was the woman who held the evidence that could destroy the entire Mazzarella empire. I slipped the black notebook into my apron pocket, right next to my keys. I took the medical file, too, folding it so it would fit inside my coat. I walked to the door. I put my socks back on. I put my shoes back on. I checked the hallway. Clear. I walked out of that house, not sneaking this time, but walking with purpose. Darwin Mazzarella thought he had silenced me. He thought he had scared me off with his threats. But he forgot one thing. He forgot that Christopher kept a diary. And he forgot that I am the only person in the world who can prove who wrote it. I walked out the service gate and let it click shut behind me. I didn't look back. I had work to do, but not cleaning. I was done cleaning up other people's messes. It was time to make a mess of my own. I sat in my car for a long time before I turned the key. My old Honda Civic has a rattle in the engine that I haven't been able to afford to fix, and usually It drives me crazy. But today, the rattling felt grounding. It was real. The leather seats in that mansion, the silent hallways, the fake lives, that was the fantasy. This rusted car, with my cleaning supplies in the trunk and a stolen diary in my pocket, this was reality. I didn't go home. I couldn't go home. My apartment is small, and right now, I felt too big for it. I felt like I was vibrating with a strange, dark energy. I pulled out my phone. It's an old smartphone, screen cracked in the corner, but it works. I typed David Mazzarella obituary into the search bar. It popped up immediately. David Mazzarella, 69, passed away peacefully at home on October 25th, survived by his brother, Darwin. There was a picture. It was Christopher. He looked older, tired, his skin a little gray, but it was him. Seeing his face in an obituary for the second time in my life was a cruel joke. The first time, there was no body, just a piece of paper from a judge declaring him dead. This time, there was a body and a grave. The service had been held at Mount Auburn Cemetery, the Mazzarella family plot. I put the phone down. I knew where that was. It's where the old money of Boston is buried. I put the car in gear. I wasn't going to cry. I was done crying. I wanted to see where he ended up. I wanted to stand over him and ask him why. The drive took 20 minutes. Mount Auburn is beautiful, like a park full of ancient trees and marble statues. It's quiet, the kind of quiet money buys you even after you're dead. I found the family plot easily. It was marked by a massive stone angel weeping into her hands. It seemed fitting. There were 3 graves. Vincent Mazzarella, the father, Claire Mazzarella, the mother, the woman I saw in the wedding album, and fresh dirt settled under a shiny new headstone, David Mazzarella. I stood there staring at the name. David. My husband was buried under the wrong name. He lived a lie, and he died a lie. I don't know how long I stood there. The wind was picking up, blowing dead leaves across the grass. I felt cold, but not from the weather. You knew him? The voice made me jump. I spun around, clutching my purse tight. An old man was standing a few feet away. He was wearing a green work jumpsuit and holding a rake. He had a weathered face like dried apple skin and white hair sticking out from under a cap. He didn't look threatening. He looked tired. I took a breath. This was it. I could run away, or I could dig. I remembered what I used to tell my students. People love to help a helpless person. I let my shoulders slump. I put a confused, wobbly smile on my face. I made my voice sound a little thinner, a little more fragile. "Oh," I said, putting a hand to my chest. "You startled me. I think I'm a little lost. My memory isn't what it used to be." The man softened immediately. He leaned on his rake. "Sorry, ma'am. Didn't mean to scare you. Who are you looking for?" "Well," I pointed a shaking finger at the fresh grave. I thought I knew this man. David. But the dates don't seem right. I remember a David Mazzarella from, 40 years ago? But he would be much older, wouldn't he? The groundskeeper's eyes lit up. There is nothing an old employee loves more than gossip. He nodded, stepping closer. "You knew, the first David." My heart skipped a beat. "The first David?" I asked, tilting my head. "There was more than one." He looked around, checking to make sure we were alone. "I'm Elliot. I've been taking care of this plot for 50 years. I buried the father, the mother, and now the son. I know where all the bones are, literally." He chuckled at his own joke. I forced a polite, confused laugh. "I'm so confused," I said. "I thought this was the son?" Elliot shook his head. He lowered his voice. "This one here? The one we buried 6 months ago. He was the heir. But he wasn't the original David. Not really." I held my breath. "I don't understand." It's a sad story, Elliot said, leaning in. The real David Mazzarella, the oldest son, he was a wild one. Ran away in the 80s. Went down to Mexico to be a painter. Hated his father. Hated the money. He swore he'd never come back. And did he? I asked. Nope, Elliot said. Word is he died down there. Motorcycle accident in 1990. The father, Vincent, he hushed it up. Didn't want the scandal. So officially, David was just traveling. I nodded slowly. So who is this? I pointed to the grave. Elliot gave me a knowing look. Well, that's the family secret, isn't it? Old man Vincent had a trust fund from his grandfather. A massive one. But the stipulation was strict. The money could only be released if there were 2 living male heirs. Darwin and David. I felt the pieces clicking together. The trust fund. The money. But if David died in Mexico? I whispered. Exactly. Elliot said. No David, no money. The fortune would have gone to charity. Vincent couldn't handle that. He was greedy. So, about 10 years ago, right before the trust was set to mature, a miracle happened. Elliot used air quotes around the word miracle. David suddenly came home, Elliot said. Walked right through the front door. He looked a little different, sure. Had a scar on his chin he didn't have before. But the family vouched for him, said it was him. The lawyers signed off. The money was released. I felt sick. So they hired someone? Elliot shrugged. I'm just the gardener, ma'am. But I have eyes. I saw the new David. He was a nice enough guy. Quieter than the original. Liked to sit in the garden and smoke a pipe. But he didn't know the layout of the house. He didn't know the names of the servants. It took him a year to learn the ropes. He looked at the grave. Whoever he was, he played the part well. Got the money released. Lived the high life for a decade. And then his liver gave out. And Darwin, I asked, does he know? Elliot laughed. A dry, rasping sound. Darwin orchestrated it. The father was too sick by then. It was Darwin who found him. I heard them arguing once, near the shed. Darwin said, I pulled you out of the gutter, don't forget that. And the new David said, and I made you a billionaire, don't forget that. I felt the ground sway beneath me. It wasn't just Christopher running away. It wasn't just him wanting a better life. He was recruited. Darwin Mazzarella had gone looking for a lookalike. He must have scouted for months. He found Christopher, a man with the right build, the right face, the right age, a man with a simple life and financial struggles. Darwin offered him a deal. Leave your wife. Leave your debt. Come play my brother. You'll live in a mansion, travel the world, and never worry about a bill again. And Christopher said yes. He sold me. He sold 30 years of marriage for a trust fund payout. Are you okay, ma'am? Elliot asked, reaching out to steady me. You look pale. I looked at the grave. I looked at the name David Mazzarella. I'm fine, I said. My voice was cold now. The confused old lady was gone. I'm just realizing something. What's that? I realized I never really knew him at all. I said, I thanked Elliot. I walked back to my car. My legs felt heavy, but my mind was sharp, clearer than it had been in a decade. I sat in the driver's seat and looked at the mansion keys in my lap. I looked at the stolen diary. Christopher was a con artist, a fraud. He had committed identity theft and fraud on a massive scale. And Darwin was his partner. If this secret came out, the Mazzarella family wouldn't just be embarrassed. They would be ruined. They would lose the trust fund. Darwin would go to prison for fraud. I looked at my hands. They were red and chapped from the cleaning chemicals. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I saw the wrinkles, the tired eyes. They thought I was nothing. Darwin thought I was a bug he could squash. Christopher thought I was a burden he could discard. But they forgot one thing. The will. If Christopher is legally dead, I am his next of kin. But if Christopher is this man, if I can prove that the man buried in this multimillion-dollar plot is actually Christopher Nixon, then I am his widow. And as his widow, I am entitled to his estate, not his old pension, his share of the Mazzarella fortune. I started the car. The engine rattled, but this time it sounded like a growl. I wasn't going to the police. Not yet. The police would just arrest Darwin and seize the money. I wouldn't see a dime. No, I needed a lawyer, a shark. And then I was going to pay a visit to Mr. Darwin Mazzarella. I put the car in drive. Rest in peace, Christopher, I whispered to the grave, because I'm about to raise hell. I don't know how long I sat in that car outside the cemetery gates. 10 minutes? An hour? Time feels different when your entire reality has just collapsed around you. I cried. I'm not ashamed to admit that. I cried until my chest hurt, until my throat felt raw. I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel and just let it out. For 10 years, I had mourned a tragedy. I had told myself a story. Poor Christopher. He must have had a heart attack. He must have fallen. He must have been taken from me. That story was painful, but it was clean. It was a story about bad luck. But the truth was dirty. Christopher hadn't been taken. He had sold me. I sat there, wiping my eyes with a fast food napkin I found in the glove box, and the memories started flooding back. Not the happy ones, the hard ones. I remembered the winter of 2016. The boiler in my house broke. It was 5 degrees outside. I didn't have the money to fix it because the bank had just frozen our joint account. I slept in my coat for 3 weeks. I heated water on the stove to wash my face. I remembered shivering under 3 blankets, praying for spring. Where was Christopher in the winter of 2016? I closed my eyes and pictured the photos in the album. He was in St. Bart's. He was lying on a beach with a drink in his hand, soaking up the sun. While I was freezing in the house we built together, he was working on his tan. I remembered the day the foreclosure notice came. I remembered the shame of packing my life into cardboard boxes, trying to hide my face from the neighbors. I remembered the way the pawnshop owner looked at me when I sold my wedding ring, like he pitied me. He gave me $200 for it. $200. Christopher was probably wearing a watch worth $10,000 that same day. He knew. He had to know. You don't leave your wife with a mortgage and 0 income and think she's going to be fine. He knew I would struggle. He knew I would lose the house. And he didn't care. The money was worth the guilt. That's what he wrote in his diary. He weighed my suffering against his comfort, and he chose his comfort. I looked down at my hands. They were resting on the steering wheel. They are old hands now. The knuckles are swollen from arthritis. The skin is dry and cracked from years of harsh cleaning chemicals. These are the hands of a woman who has scrubbed other people's toilets to survive. I looked at those hands, and suddenly the tears stopped. It was like a switch flipped in my brain. 1 minute, I was drowning in sorrow. The next, the water drained away, and all that was left was rock. Hard, cold rock. I thought about Darwin, the arrogance of him. He thought he could pay me off with a threat. He thought he could scare the little old cleaning lady back into the shadows. They underestimated me, both of them. Christopher thought I was weak. He thought I would just fade away. Darwin thought I was stupid. He thought I wouldn't figure it out. But they forgot who I was before I was a maid. I was a guidance counselor. My job was to see through lies. My job was to protect the vulnerable. And right now, the most vulnerable person in this equation was me. But I wasn't going to be vulnerable anymore. I reached up and adjusted the rearview mirror. I looked at myself. My eyes were red and puffy. My hair was a mess. I looked like a victim. No, I said aloud. My voice sounded raspy in the small car. Not today. I opened my purse. I dug past the unpaid bills and the grocery list. I found my compact mirror and my lipstick. It was a shade called Berry Bold. I hadn't worn it in years. It felt too bright for a widow. I uncapped it. I applied it carefully, tracing the lines of my lips. I blotted it. I fixed my hair, smoothing down the gray flyaways. I put on my glasses. I looked in the mirror again. The victim was gone. Staring back at me was a woman who had survived hell and was ready to bring the fire back with her. I started the engine. The rattle didn't bother me anymore. It sounded like a battle cry. I wasn't going home to hide. I was going back to the mansion. And as I drove, the plan formed in my mind. It was simple, and it was devastating. You see, I know a little bit about the law. You can't work in a school system for 40 years without learning about rules. And here is the rule that Darwin Mazzarella forgot. Fraud vitiates everything. That's a legal term. It means that if a contract is based on a lie, the contract is void. The trust fund, the billions of dollars that the Mazzarella family enjoyed, was released based on a contract. The contract stated that there were 2 living heirs, Darwin and David, but there weren't 2 heirs. There was 1 heir and 1 imposter. If I proved that David was actually Christopher Nixon, then the condition of the trust was never met. The money should never have been released. That meant every dollar Darwin had spent in the last 10 years was stolen money. Every car, every vacation, every stock purchase. It was all fraud. If I went to the police, Darwin wouldn't just lose the money. He would go to federal prison. Identity theft, wire fraud, conspiracy. The list of charges would be a mile long. I held the power. Me, the woman who scrubbed his floors. I held his life in the palm of my arthritic hand. I pulled up to the massive iron gates of the estate. I didn't go to the service entranced this time. I drove right up to the main intercom. I pressed the button. Deliveries go to the side. A voice crackled. It was Darwin's assistant. It's not a delivery, I said. My voice was calm. Steady. It's June Nixon. Tell Mr. Mazzarella I'm here. I'm sorry, June, but Mr. Mazzarella said you were let go this morning. You're not allowed on the property. Tell him, I said, leaning closer to the microphone, that I have Christopher's diary, and I have the x-rays. There was a long silence on the other end. Then the gate buzzed. It swung open slowly, like the mouth of a beast. I drove up the long, winding driveway. I parked my rusted Honda right next to Darwin's shiny black Mercedes. I got out. I smoothed down my coat. I clutched my purse tight against my side, the purse that held the evidence. I walked up the front steps. I didn't wait to be invited. I didn't wipe my feet. The front door opened before I could knock. Darwin was standing there. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His tie was loosened. He looked sweaty. He looked small. He looked at me, and for the first time, he didn't see a cleaning lady. He saw the lioness who had just woken up. June, he said. His voice wavered. We should talk. I walked past him, stepping onto the marble foyer I had polished just this morning. I didn't look at the floor. I looked straight ahead toward his office. Yes, Darwin, I said, we should. I walked into his study and sat down in the leather chair behind his desk. His chair. I placed my purse on the desk. I waited for him to follow me. I waited for him to realize that the hierarchy of this house had just shifted. He was the billionaire, yes, but I was the one holding the match, and he was standing in a room full of gasoline. The lioness was awake, and she was hungry for justice. Darwin didn't sit down. He stood in the doorway of his own office, staring at me like I was a burglar who had broken in to steal the silverware. I was sitting in his chair. It was a massive thing, high-backed leather that smelled like polish and money. It swiveled smoothly. I adjusted my weight, leaning back just a fraction. For the first time in 10 years, I wasn't looking up at someone. I was the one sitting comfortably while someone else stood on tired legs. "Get out of that chair," Darwin hissed. His voice was tight, vibrating with a mix of anger and fear. He reached for the phone on the wall. "I'm calling security. I'm calling the police. You are trespassing, June. You are mentally unstable, and I will have you removed." I didn't flinch. I didn't shout. I simply reached into my purse. "Go ahead," I said calmly. "Call them. In fact, call the district attorney while you're at it. It will save me the postage on the letter I drafted." Darwin's hand froze halfway to the receiver. He looked at me, really looked at me, and he saw the manila envelope I had placed on the mahogany desk. "What is that?" he asked. "Sit down, Darwin," I said. It wasn't a request. It was the voice I used to use when I sent a student to detention. It was a voice that expected obedience. Darwin hesitated. He looked at the door, then back at me. Slowly, reluctantly, he walked over and sat in one of the guest chairs opposite the desk. He looked smaller now. The desk was a barrier, a shield, and I was the one behind it. I opened the envelope. "You think I'm just a cleaning lady," I began, my voice steady. "You think I'm invisible. You think because I scrub your toilets, I don't have a brain. But you made a mistake. You forgot that before I was a maid, I was a wife. And I know my husband." I pulled out the first item, my marriage certificate. It was yellowed with age, folded at the corners. "Item 1, I said, sliding it across the polished wood. "Christopher Nixon, my husband, legally married to me in 1984. Never divorced." Darwin glanced at it, but didn't touch it. He sneered. "So, you have a marriage certificate for a dead man. That proves nothing." I reached into the envelope again. I pulled out the medical file I had taken from the bathroom. "Item 2, I said, medical records for David Mazzarella, dated 2016. It shows a surgical pin in the left ankle, a pin from a football injury in 1974, an injury Christopher Nixon sustained. David Mazzarella never played football. He was an artist." Darwin's sneer faltered. He shifted in his seat. "Coincidence," he muttered. "Lots of people break their ankles." "Maybe," I agreed. "But lots of people don't write confessions." I pulled out the black notebook, the diary. I saw Darwin's eyes widen. He recognized it. He knew exactly what it was. He reached for it, but I pulled it back just out of his reach. "Ah," I tutted. "Look with your eyes, Darwin, not your hands." I opened it to the marked page. I read aloud, my voice echoing in the quiet room. The money was worth the guilt. A man only gets one life. I chose the better one. I closed the book with a sharp snap. That is Christopher's handwriting. I have 30 years of birthday cards and grocery lists to prove it. A handwriting expert will confirm it in 5 minutes. Darwin was pale now. He was sweating. He loosened his tie, pulling at the collar like it was choking him. But he wasn't done fighting. He was a businessman, and businessmen always think they can spin their way out of trouble. "It's circumstantial," he said, his voice rising. "A diary isn't DNA. You can't prove that book belonged to the man buried in my family plot. You can't exhume a body just because you have a hunch." I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a hunter who just heard the trap snap shut. "You're right," I said. "Exhuming a body is hard. It takes a court order. It takes time." I reached into my purse one last time. I pulled out a small plastic sandwich bag. Inside was a silver locket. I've worn it every day for 10 years. Inside the locket is a lock of Christopher's hair from our wedding day. He had cut it off as a joke, and I had kept it. Then, I pulled out a second bag. This one contained a hairbrush I had taken from the master bathroom this morning. David's hairbrush, full of gray hairs. I placed the two bags side by side on the desk. I don't need to dig him up, Darwin, I said softly. I have the DNA right here. The hair from the man who lived in this house, and the hair from the man I married. If I send these to a lab, what do you think they will find? Silence. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the computer fan. Darwin stared at the two plastic bags. He stared at them like they were bombs. He knew. He knew exactly what the test would show. He slumped back in his chair. The fight went out of him. He ran a hand over his face. Okay, he said quietly. Okay, you win. He looked up at me. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating look. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. You're smart, June, he said. Smarter than I gave you credit for. You want justice? Fine. Justice costs money. He uncapped a gold pen. He scribbled something quickly and tore the check out. He slid it across the desk toward me. I looked at it. Pay to the order of June Nixon, $10,000. I stared at the number. $10,000. He leaned back, looking satisfied. Take it. Go home. Fix your car. Buy some new clothes. Just lose the diary. And the hair. I looked from the check to him. And then I started to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a dry, rasping sound. $10,000. I asked. It's a lot of money, Darwin said defensively. More than you make in 6 months scrubbing floors. I picked up the check. I held it up to the light. Then, very slowly, I tore it in half. I tore it again. And again. I let the pieces flutter down onto the desk like confetti. You think my silence costs $10,000? I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. Darwin, you have no idea what my life has been like. I leaned forward, bracing my hands on the desk. When Christopher left, the bank took the house. I lost $40,000 in equity. When the IRS came after me for his unpaid taxes, they took my savings. That was another $15,000. When I couldn't pay the credit cards he maxed out in secret, the interest rates buried me. I have paid over $30,000 in interest alone in the last decade. I pointed a finger at his face. You stole my husband. You stole my retirement. You stole my dignity. And you think you can buy me off for the price of a used car. Darwin swallowed hard. What do you want? I don't want your charity, I said, and I don't want an apology. I don't care about your feelings, and I certainly don't care about your family reputation. I picked up the manila envelope. I have already drafted a letter to the district attorney. I said, it outlines the fraud. It explains how you and Christopher conspired to defraud the trust. It explains that the billions you are currently sitting on are stolen property. I saw the terror in his eyes return, sharper this time. He knew what that meant. Prison, asset seizure, ruin. I also have a letter drafted to the Boston Globe. I added, they love a scandal. Billionaire fakes death to swindle family trust. It's a front-page story, Darwin. Don't, he whispered. Please. It would destroy everything. I know, I said. So here is the situation. You are standing on a cliff. I am the one holding the rope. I sat back in the leather chair. I crossed my arms. This isn't a blackmail threat, Darwin. I'm not a criminal. This is a business negotiation. I am Christopher's legal widow. Under the law, I am entitled to his assets. Since he was posing as David, and David is dead, I am the sole beneficiary of his estate. I paused, letting the words sink in. I want half, I said. Darwin choked. Half. That's millions. I want half of Christopher's share of the trust, I corrected, and I want it deposited into an offshore account by tomorrow morning. I want the deed to the vacation home in Florida, the one he bought with our dream money. And I want a written confession signed by you stating that Christopher is dead. A real death certificate, so I can finally stop looking for him. Darwin looked like he was going to be sick. And if I say no, then I mail the letters. I said simply, and you spend the rest of your life in a cell explaining to your cellmate how you lost $1 billion to a cleaning lady. I checked my watch, a cheap plastic thing from Walmart. It's 4 p.m., Darwin. The post office closes at 5 o'clock. You have 1 hour to decide if you want to be a poor inmate or a rich man with a slightly smaller bank account. I waited. The room was silent. This was the trap. I hadn't just caught him. I had cornered him. And for the first time in 10 years, June Nixon wasn't the victim. I was the boss. The silence in that office was heavy. It was the kind of silence that usually comes before a storm. Darwin was staring at the clock on the wall. The second hand was ticking away, tick, 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 loud and relentless. He looked at me. Then he looked at the manila envelope full of evidence. Then he looked at the phone. He knew I wasn't bluffing. You can't be serious, Darwin said, his voice cracking. Half. The trust is worth hundreds of millions. You're asking for an empire. I'm asking for what belongs to my husband. I said calmly. Technically, since Christopher was pretending to be David, he was entitled to 50% of the family assets. Since he is dead, and I am his widow, that 50% is mine. I leaned forward. Think of it as back pay, Darwin. For 10 years of deception. For 10 years of me eating canned soup while my husband ate caviar on your dime. Darwin stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the sprawling grounds of his estate. He was trapped. If he called the police, he would lose everything and go to jail. If he paid me, he would lose a fortune, but he would keep his freedom and his reputation. It's a simple calculation for a rich man. They always choose freedom. He turned back to me. His face was gray. I can't liquidate that much cash by tomorrow. It's impossible. Then liquidate what you can, I said, and transfer the assets. Stocks, bonds, real estate. I want the deed to the Florida property signed over today. And I want a wire transfer for the cash balance initiated before I leave this room. He glared at me. And if I do this, you disappear. The diary disappears. The hair samples. If the money is in my account, I said, then Christopher Nixon stays dead. David Mazzarella stays dead. And you get to keep playing the grieving brother. Darwin walked back to his desk. He slumped into the guest chair because I was still sitting in his. He pulled a checkbook and a stack of transfer forms from a drawer. His hands were shaking so bad he could barely hold the pen. Watching him write those zeros was the most satisfying moment of my life. It wasn't about greed. Please understand that. I didn't want the money for yachts or fancy jewelry. I wanted the money because it represented justice. It represented every tear I cried. It represented every sleepless night I spent worrying about the electric bill. Christopher had sold me out for this money. Now, I was taking it back. Done, Darwin said, sliding the papers across the desk. The wire is authorized. The deed transfer is notarized. I'm a notary. It's legal. I picked up the papers. I checked the amounts. I checked the signatures. It was more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I stood up. I put the papers in my purse right next to the diary. One more thing, I said. Darwin looked up, terrified. What? You said that was it. The diary, I said, patting my purse. I'm keeping it. No. Darwin stood up. That was the deal. You give me the evidence. I promised I wouldn't go to the police, I said coldly. And I won't, as long as the check's clear and you leave me alone. But this diary, this is my insurance policy. It stays with me. If anything happens to me, if I have a sudden accident, or if my bank account gets frozen, this diary goes straight to the FBI. My lawyer already has instructions. Darwin sank back down. He was defeated, completely and utterly defeated by the cleaning lady. Goodbye, Darwin, I said. I walked out of the office. I walked across the marble foyer. I walked out the front door and down the steps to my rusted Honda Civic. I got in the car. I placed my purse on the passenger seat. I looked at the mansion one last time. It didn't look scary anymore. It just looked like a pile of bricks. I drove away. I drove past the bus stop where I used to wait in the rain. I drove past the grocery store where I used to use coupons for expired bread. I drove straight to the bank. 1 month later, the flight attendant is smiling at me. She's young, with a crisp uniform and perfect hair. More champagne, Ms. Nixon? She asks. I look down at my crystal flute. It's empty. Yes, please, I say. I'm not wearing my gray cleaning uniform. I'm wearing a white silk suit. It's tailored perfectly to fit me. I'm not sitting in seat 34B near the toilets. I'm in seat 1A, first class. The plane hums beneath me. We are 30,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean. I look out the window. The clouds look like a floor of cotton. I'm going to Paris. For 30 years, Christopher promised to take me to Paris. He used to cut out pictures of the Eiffel Tower and stick them on the fridge. One day, June, he would say, one day we'll go. He went without me. He went with his new name and his new money, but he went as a fraud. He went looking over his shoulder, terrified of being caught. I am going as a free woman. I reached into my carry-on bag and pulled out the black notebook, Christopher's diary. I haven't read it since that day in the bedroom. I don't need to read it. I know what it says. It says he was weak. It says he was selfish. I ordered a metal trash can from the flight attendant, a small waste bin for my tissues. She brought it, looking confused. I ripped the first page out of the diary, then the second, then the third. I shredded them into tiny pieces and dropped them into the bin. The money was worth the guilt. That's what he wrote. I disagree. The money wasn't worth the guilt, because in the end, the money didn't save him. He died alone, with a fake name, hiding from the only person who ever truly loved him. I, on the other hand, have the money and the truth. I finished shredding the diary. The last piece of Christopher, the last piece of David, was gone. I took a sip of the champagne. It was cold and crisp. It tasted like victory. I cried for Christopher for 10 years. I wasted a decade of my life mourning a man who didn't exist. But tears don't pay the bills. The truth does. And the truth is, I am better off without him. I settled back into the wide leather seat. I closed my eyes. I wasn't thinking about the past. I wasn't thinking about the dusty mansion or the rude billionaire. I was thinking about what I would do when I landed. Maybe I'd visit the Louvre. Maybe I'd eat a croissant by the Seine. Maybe I'd just walk down the street, head held high, knowing that I survived the storm and came out the other side stronger. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into Paris. I smiled. I didn't just survive. I won. What city are you listening from? And what time is it there? Write it in the comments. And if you'd like to help me keep sharing these emotional, thrilling stories every day, even a small donation makes a big difference. It truly helps keep the channel alive. For more life stories like this, you can explore the other videos on my channel and subscribe. On the screen, you'll see 2 new stories I'm sure you'll enjoy. Click one and start listening right away.